Hello, I Divya Momaya, founder of Mentor My Board. Welcome you all to this exclusive series of Free Press Journal in association with Mentor My Board, which is Grow with Governance. Yes, focus of the series is on the role of independent directors in business growth and sustainability. Mentor My Board is a platform to groom, nurture, handhold promoters, independent directors, women directors, and board aspirants with a vision to create a community of 1 lakh directors by 2027 and has been providing a complete virtual platform to directors, mentors, and corporates. Free Press Journal is more than 90-year-old newspaper. Today, Free Press has gone beyond just being a print medium and has its strong digital presence with large online subscribers for their e-paper. Free Press Journal has been quite active in the webinar space since lockdown, and even before lockdown, they had been very actively involved into the policy level discussions. And this present initiative organized today is a part of Free Press Journal's ongoing strategy to create awareness on various policy level topics. And in this series, we have with us Professor Basu. Professor Sankarshan Basu has been recently appointed as Additional Non-Executive Independent Director on Federal Bank. Professor Basu is he is a professor of quantitative finance and risk management at IIM Bangalore. He has been involved in teaching, research, consulting, academic administration for more than 19 years. Wow. Covering areas in finance, financial markets, financial products, banking, clearing, settlement, risk management, and so on. Professor Basu he has specialization in statistics and has been a board member of the Clearing Corporation of India, Billcare Limited, BGSE Properties and Securities Limited, and Bangalore Stock Exchange Limited. So it's indeed wonderful pleasure to have you here with us, Professor Basu. And I would request Jessilia, our principal correspondent from Free Press Journal, to initiate the interview with you. Thank you. Over to you, Jessilia.
Just to start with, we would like to know your journey as a board member and to understand what were the challenges that you faced during the initial journey and now how things looks like.
As I said, the first board that I was appointed on was the Bangalore Stock Exchange board, which was still a stock exchange at that point. And those appointments as an independent director, which is technically referred to as the public interest director (PID), was done by the regulator, was done by SEBI. So I was a PID on Bangalore Stock Exchange. It had a very, very interesting or kind of turning point for the history of the stock exchange. Because a couple of months prior to that, I joined the board, I think in December 2012. And I think around May or June of 2012, SEBI had come up with specific norms which included turnover norms, daily turnover, net worth, and all of that. What that meant was that, and as we've seen over the years now, most regional exchanges had to shut down because they can't meet the SEBI norms. A few still exist because they went the legal route and then the legal process still on. But what was important out here was that, even to do the exit, it was not as if you could, because there was public money and there was public interest involved. It is not like a shutdown of a company that you could simply say one day, okay, let's just pay off our creditors and then let's just kind of shut shop and walk away. So and every stakeholder had to be kind of taken care of. There were assets, physical assets, buildings, and all of that had to be taken care of. New company had to be formed. But more importantly, SEBI had a stake. There were cases in which legal cases were there, in which the exchange was not a party, but because the trade happened through the exchange, and this was like 20, 30-year-old in the histories, which had to be accounted for. So it was a very interesting learning experience. And then also there were tax implications because it was probably for the first time that in India that stock exchanges were being shut down. And in some sense, the income tax department was also kind of somewhat unaware as to how do you deal with, proceeds that would get generated in that process, not arising of a normal course of business. Because a normal course of business, there's enough things. So it was kind of a very interesting learning experience that I had because of actually working with the board, working in the board, working with the audit committee of the board as well to kind of move it down the road and essentially get a complete clean sheet from SEBI in about a year and a half's time, I think in 2 years they had given about a 3-4 year window, but in 2 years I think we not only managed to shut it down, but we also managed to kind of get all the clearances, which also meant all the stakeholders were taken care of, appropriately allocated money, whatever was due to SEBI was transferred, uh, contingencies created for potential contingent liabilities that could land up, and things like that. So it was kind of that was a very. I mean, I don't think many people will have that kind of an experience of running of doing that kind of an activity, overseeing that kind of an activity. The other one, the next one that I kind of got on was on the board of CCIL, Clearing Corporation. Again, arising out of the fact that Clearing Corporation is one of the only, probably a very niche institution which deals with clearing and settlement of government securities. Obviously, it's extended to non-government securities today also, and forex and all of that. But it started off as clearing and settlement of government securities. Um, it has got very few parallel across the world. I mean, some the other ones are also they're like a handful of them. So like Euroclear, ClearNet, London Clearing House, but there are very few. Now a few more, but when it started in early 2000, there were very few. So I mean, as a part of our consulting assignment, I did one of the very first reviews of their risk management processes way back in 2006, and they had a very interest. They had a good policy that they would have a review done of their processes, because after risk was one of their primary, or managing risk was their primary cornerstone. They would have to do a review, external review, every 3 years, and the same reviewer could not do consecutive reviews to ensure that there's no mistakes or nothing that's carried forward and all of that. So I did the first review. I kind of know who did the second review, and then in 2011-12, I think I did the third review review that was there, and there was he's no more with us, but I'm sure you would have known him. Mr. Rajbade was on the board, and he was kind of heading the risk committee of CCIL and those CODRM. As a part of that, I actually worked very closely with Mr. Rajbade, understanding it, and I think Mr. Rajbade had a fantastic understanding of the markets. I mean, a real stalwart. Again, taught us. I think not just me, taught a lot of people a lot of things about how markets operated on a micro basis, because most of us come in from a macro level position and kind of say, okay, this is what happens. But so around 2013, when Mr. Rajwade's term as a director was kind of coming to an end, he reached out to me and kind of asked me to join the board again, primarily because of the expertise and then the quant expertise that I would bring in, which was relevant and important to CCIL. I was on the CCIL board for about a good 7 years, because when I joined, the RBI mandate of 2 terms of 3 years each was not there. So when I was there for the first term, I was again subsequently reappointed. But then RBI came up with this new mandate, and then they said, no, that is basically 6 years is retrospective. You can't, because there was a thing that they said, okay, well, we'll look at prospectively, but RBI kind of said, it has to be, even though it's predates, but it has to be kind of 6 years in all. And then I think the first year was, I think, some bits and some things, some time went elapsed before the approval and all of that. So that's why I was there for about 7 months, which was again fantastic. I know Divya mentioned BillCare, and that's another company that I would like to kind of mention, because I learned something I learned a lot of things, but what not to do. Let me put it that way. Because the reason I got into the BillCare board is because I knew people in BillCare, not the CEO, not the owner, Mr. Bhandari, but I knew other people, and they kind of requested me to join the board. But I kind of left the board within about a year and a half. I resigned from the board, and the reason is I realized that being a family-held firm, I mean, they had shareholders, but there was a significant family-owned holding. A lot of corporate governance norms, a lot of active things were not really being followed or taken care of, and it was like see, it had a. So I have not kept track of what they've done, but at that point they had some very fantastic products. They had seen good days. They had done very good things.
I would like to understand, because you spoke about family boards and the boards
Yeah.
of the promoter-driven companies.
Mhm.
So, what has been your experience? When you have seen professional
So the
boards
only, so
versus
to be honest,
family boards. So, what is
yeah,
the
so
yeah?
to be honest, the only experience I have of being on a board, which is a listed company, but also predominantly family driven or family run, has been Billcare. And as I said, it was kind of the levels of corporate governance, and I think now as we look at it, and since I've sat on other boards which obviously have been far better managed and more professional, I can kind of say that I think somewhere down the line the need or the line that is there kind of gets smudged, erased, whatever. Now, as I said, with just one experience, I cannot comment, and I should not. I mean, in this case, whether it was done deliberately or it was kind of taken as a normal course of business, and because also one has to realize that this area or this aspect of governance, corporate governance, is an evolving field. I mean, 10 years, 15 years back in
Absolutely.
India, it was kind of just about coming in, and people never really bothered about much about that. Today, it's a completely different system, and I don't know. All of this I'm talking about is about 5, 6 years back. So it's in that continuum of development. All of this happened. So therefore, I cannot say that. It would be wrong on my part to directly state that it happened because of it was deliberately done, or it was kind of, I mean, the
Okay.
going system, and gone down that route. But I would definitely say that the from that one experience, I mean, and it's a limited one experience story. The level of governance that was followed, or that is kind of followed in in a family-run business, is probably lower and weaker than that is there in a professionally managed entity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. How does the risk management becomes, critical in banking sector, especially at the board level?
See, it is obviously very, very critical because two things. One, obviously, at the board level, you do not see every single transaction. You're not supposed to see every single transaction, and you cannot,
Right.
because you are in being a non-executive independent director. You can. There is only that much you can kind of oversee or look into. But what you can and what you should do is two things. One, get people to set up the right processes, because a lot of the risk management issues that we see today in whichever place, whichever bank, and you can kind of go back and look at the biggest entities also have been have faced this, goes back to, are the process, how good and how strong are those processes. I think that's the most fundamental thing that one needs to do to ensure that there is good. I mean, that alone will not suffice, but that is kind of a very, very important necessary condition. The second thing, and I think that is on an ongoing basis, is ask the right questions. Not necessarily the preferred question, but the right questions. Maybe a tough question. I mean, and allow for the fact that there will be failures. Allow for the fact that there will be one or two breaches of the limit. But the question is, that ask those right questions. Why did the breach happen? Has the cause analysis been done, and what does it tell me? What action has been taken so that this does not recur again in the future? So I think that is the most, these two together, and in the process, obviously, it's not just the system; it's also the delegation of authority, the whole, in a very simple model, the maker checker. So if you actually think of it, one very simple example, the whole Nirav Modi PNB case. I mean, apart from the other aspects, but at the PNB, and if I just look at the PNB end of the story, the maker checker model was kind of violated, because essentially the guy who was who was doing the deal was also having the access to the password of his or her boss to approve it. Now that's a clear. I mean, obviously, and this is a good example of saying, obviously PNB had a process. PNB said, okay, we need a maker, we need a checker, and there are independent people who need to do it. But somewhere down the line, this line got fudged. I mean, for whatever reason that we now know of, or probably some things we don't know of, but it got fudged, and the effective thing was the whole argument of a maker checker was lost, because if you, it's like, it's actually, I mean, I tell my students all the time. So something which our parents have told us all our lives in school exams actually is not a good idea in a very short term. So all of us would remember that your parents would have told us, and my parents definitely told me, कि after the exam, before you submit your paper, revise, दो बार पढ़ लो, but actually doesn't help. The reason why it doesn't help is, if I write a piece of note, or whatever, a page or 2 pages, and I immediately go back to reading it, chances are that, and when I've written it, if I don't know, it's a different, but this is like if I've missed out a word here and there, or made a small mistake. So essentially those kinds of things. Mentally, I've done it. Mentally, I've done
Right.
it. It's just that somehow it has got missed out. Now, when I'm reading it immediately in the same flow, my mental requirement, my mental setup is still that I've done it. So even though it's missing, I'm still reading as if it has been done. Now, ideally, that revision works if you could write it, keep it aside for like a few hours when you are completely out of all of this, and re-looking at it afresh. Now, unfortunately, in an exam situation, this cannot happen. In
Absolutely.
another situation, it can happen. Today, you can kind of do a no, do a report, keep it aside, do some other things. Tomorrow morning, before filing, you can read it, and then you will see, small things like dotting that i's and crossing the t's and things like that, which in normal course of things seem to be there, actually is missing, and therefore you can correct it. But if you read it again, you will not do it, and that's a very important. That's the reason why having the maker checker to be the same person kind of fails, because that guy a could be doing it deliberately for fraud. That's obviously illegal. But involuntary also, if I do it immediately, involuntarily also, I will not be spotting the mistake immediately. Maybe next day I'll spot it, but it will be too late. And therefore, the need for the maker checker. So in PNB case is a classic case where from the PN, and I think it is a board failure at some level. The fact that there was a maker checker and the so is that actually being tracked? Is the I have created a system. It's like I've come and given you a fantastic diagnosis and a prescription. Are you following the prescription? And am I asking the right questions to find out whether that's being followed? Because not following that is not going to solve the problem. In fact, it can worsen the problem. And that's exactly what happened.
And I've seen agenda papers come to the boards, 2 days prior, and it becomes sometimes little difficult for independent directors who are outsiders completely. So to review those thousands of pages in just 2 days, and again, I'm sure when you are reviewing that, you are in a different state of mind. So how do you correlate this situation, and what would be
So
your advice to those
what we
independent
do,
directors? Yeah.
so okay, I'm not on the board, but I sit on the risk committee of National Clearing Corporation of India, which is NCDEX's the clear. I mean, they have a separate NCCL. So what we do, and I think we found that to be a much better thing, because obviously you're absolutely right. In a board, though the law states, or I think that notices and then things have to come like 10 days or 15 days in advance. Even if it comes, I completely agree with you, Divya. But even if it comes to me 15 days in advance, and if like there is a thousand, I mean the board minutes, board notes, and all of that is
No.
like 800, 900 pages, 1,000 pages. Obviously that's not my only job. I have other things to do. So to read this, absorb it, and ask the right questions, it becomes quite onerous and tough. I completely agree with it. Now, in a clearing corporation, and the reason I'm using this is because this kind, I think, is a process which can be used elsewhere also.
Yeah.
So, in a clearing corporation, what in NCCL, what we've now started doing, and which we used to do in CCI also, if the things became that important, is we would have of the same committee, we have a pre RMC call, or now these days a call or a pre RMC meet, which is basically a couple of days, maybe 2, 3, 4 days before the actual recorded, of the official meeting. But actually look at those agenda items and actually ask the management, saying, okay, now you have 10 agenda items. Now tell us which of these 10 are the most important to you, and let us spend the next 3 hours or 4 hours actually analyzing those, because there are certain things which are going to be routine, and there's no point wasting time on that. So take that time to kind of do that too, so that and then what happens is the expectation is that when it comes to the board, we have dealt with it since in all seriousness, or when it comes to the committee, we've dealt with it, we have an idea. But and then while from the management's perspective, that would mean that in the actual meeting, this board of the committee, it would actually be easily taken forward. But from the members' perspective, the board members or the committee members' perspective, there's an interesting thing that also happens. Yes, that's a normal expectation, and in most of the cases that would happen, because the pre-meet would have cleared out those issues and all that. However, if it is a contentious issue, or if there's something, I still reserve the right to have. Now I have I've read that whole document, whatever number of pages I had. There has been a collective discussion, and I had another 2, 3 days to kind of think over it, apply some thought to it. And I have obviously every right to reopen the discussion in the actual meeting with the board of the committee.
Correct.
So it's essentially a two-step process, and that kind of helps in these cases where taking a decision on the spot may not always be the most, could actually translate to becoming something close to an impulsive decision, which may not be in the best interest of the organization.
ESG is becoming gaining significance at board level discussions as well. So, how do you think financial services or banks can help achieve it?
It's a good question. I actually not very clear as to how it can be done. I know it is becoming important. I know it's kind of becoming one of. I think one. I mean, this is a broader level. I don't know a criticism or a broader level observation that I have, that sometimes we put these conditions without really thinking through how we will kind of do that, and I think that's ESG has also become one like that. But thankfully, the evolution is happening. I mean, the closest comparison I have is with our with the great 2% CSR spend, and from my experience, most companies don't really do the 2% CSR spend in the manner it should be done. Profitable companies do the CSR spend because it's a law, because otherwise you'll be pulled up under the law, named and shamed, and all those things will happen. But what do? They use the last of that list, donation to the Prime Minister's Relief Fund, because that's the easiest thing for me to do. That I know I have to spend money, and I'm nothing. I mean, it's legally allowed, and they don't care about. I mean, I'm not trying to get into any discussion as to whether we should donate to the Prime Minister's Relief Fund or not. That's fine. That's perfectly legitimate. But why do companies take it? Because that's the easiest of the thing. It's like me writing a check, handing it over. Now I have complied with the law. I have a receipt. My CSR spend is done. I can't be pulled up. Now it's somebody else's job to kind of go and do it. I don't think that was the idea of the CSR money. The CSR money, the idea was that you would actually proactively do something to help the system, the society. Same thing with ESG. I mean, it kind of has become that. And I'm not sure that we've kind of figured out how we could do it. Because I don't think bankers themselves really understand what would constitute to be an ESG related product and a project. So I think there needs to be a larger understanding of the bankers themselves and people on this side of the table, that what would constitute this, because that then only you can kind of devise appropriate products, and you can then kind of try to go out in the market and educate the borrowers. And I'm using educate for a broader context, so that borrowers who are borrowing money for their own projects may be able to kind of fine tune their projects, dovetail it to also meet ESG goals, which is a win-win for everybody. So I think that's one of the things which needs to be done to kind of really get in that space.
I would, going back to the governance question, I would like to understand, as a professor and a teacher, how often do you think it's important for universities? There is governance as a part of curriculum now, but then still, how important it is to cultivate that into the minds of the students?
I think it is very, very important, and I think we do it very late, because I think increasingly it's only the business schools that have started looking at governance or ethics and governance, or people call it differently, but broadly this aspect as a part of their curriculum. But I think this is something which should be taught, and not just taught for the sake of teaching, but taught and really emphasized on at primary school level or kindergarten level onwards. Because you see, I get a student out here for in 10 weeks, one term I teach an ethics and governance course. What is the likelihood that I mean, how much will I be able to change this kid or this guy in 10 weeks? Because a lot of the formation has already happened, and we don't tend to believe. I mean, whether you should call it ethics, you should call it something else. I come from a Christian. I studied all my life in a Christian missionary school in Calcutta. We used to have a subject called moral science every morning till I think we were in 9th or 10th standard. I can't remember that, but like good 8-9 years of our life we studied that. And we used to have an exam for that. Now, but it was also done in a very, very. I mean, at some level, we can say that it was kind of not so important, and we would do something and get away with it. But I think and obviously the problem in that context was moral science. What now we can relate back to ethics, but it was also taught from the kind of a semi-religious. I mean, it didn't have to be any specific religion, but a overall religious argument. But I think it should be moved around to kind of talking about figuring out ways in which, like we've done financial inclusion for kids, we've moved on that. I think similarly, ethics for kids is something which should be the big push, because that's where you will actually create an ethical system going forward. I mean, if I've been brought up, if I've grown up in a certain orientation, a 10-week exposure is not really going to. I mean, yes, one or two cases it will happen probably, but on the whole, it is not going to really change my outlook overnight.
Today at the present time, what are the challenges you think governance face in the face in this country, and how do you think, how can it impact growth going forward?
Challenge, in my opinion, that governance faces in this thing is, um, accountability. So while on one hand, some people are so it's a very very uneven playing field is what I'll call. For on some people, there is a very high level of accountability that is thrust on them, whereas others are kind of completely unaccountable. Accountability is important, uh, but accountability also should also be kind of covered with the thing that what do I have in. I mean, do I have the authority to kind of impose it? So otherwise, saying that you're accountable, but you don't really have any authority to do it, does not really make any sense. What can I? I mean, what do you do? What do you do? If you look at the, in some companies it's happened, and this is a case where suddenly you see some of these cases where some independent directors resign, and that becomes a big news. The question is, why did it have to come to that? Why are we not building in processes, or why are we not kind of factoring in things? Because if I walk away, does it solve the problem? I mean, if you believe, if the system believes I'm important, because if I'm insignificant, because if I'm insignificant and if I resign from a board, nothing should happen. The board should be able to appoint somebody else who's better than me in my position, and therefore things should actually be better. If the board is worried that by my leaving and making that public statement that will affect the organization and the board adversely, which means what I was saying is relevant and should be acted upon. And then, why does it have to take, and why are there not enough mechanisms built in? So it's essentially you're making me accountable, but you're not giving me any right. And then the only option I have is to say, okay, it's like me being Pontius Pilate and say, I wash my hands off, you be on your own, I don't care any longer. But it might protect me as an individual. But when I am in that position, it's not just about me as an individual, it's also, see, why are independent directors there? Because to protect other stakeholders. By this action, am I really protecting other stakeholders? And I really doubt whether that protection is coming in. Um, and I think we should think about how better to kind of factor those things in so that the stakeholders who should be protected or need to be protected are actually protected better.
Any advice you would like to give the aspiring independent directors?
I think, on what, well, I don't know. Okay. I don't think anybody should become an independent director or come onto the board just for the because there's this, historically a whole media, I mean, a movie setup and all that created this glamour of being on boards. I don't think that should be the attraction. Be on a board where you can contribute, you have the ability to contribute. So, for example, if somebody were to ask me to be on a board of, a thing which I have no clue on, it doesn't make sense. So I think, and be on a board of a company, be on a board where you can contribute, be an active contributor, and be prepared to kind of put in those hours, because it is not going to be easy. Now, relatively, obviously, there is a compensation aspect to it, but it is not always going to be driven by compensation, because the amount of work you put in may not always match up to the compensation requirement. And I don't think the compensation argument should be the driver. The driver should be your interest, your need to do something, you want to do something, and in a space where you can do something, where you can make a positive difference. That should be the driver for you to choose to become an independent director.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yes, Jessilia,
Thanks.
over to you for the closing remarks. And it was indeed, wonderful interaction with you, Professor Prabhu and
Thank you.
Basu. And I look forward to, have more detailed interactions with you.
Sure, anytime.
Yeah,
Uh,
over to you,
Professor
Jessilia.
Bas, yeah, Professor Bas, it was nice listening to you, and I think the whole experience you shared was, more, interesting to hear. Made the conversation a lot more interesting. The few points I would like to highlight from this discussion was that you mentioned about the experience you had with Bangalore Stock Exchange. I think that was something, that people need to understand how, what was the changes that have happened regulatory level, and how things have evolved, and how that the experience that you shared was quite interesting for in the session. And second point you mentioned about accountability in governance would, it's very important, and that people, independent directors should ask the right question, which will be critical going forward also. And about inculcating governance in some level among students, I think that's also quite critical, because then these in young minds end up being part of boards and companies. So I think they will be able to carry forward those ethics that you're talking about. And also, most importantly, you said that all these independent directors should be active contributors to the board. I think these few points which I would, personally would like to take from this discussion. And thanks a lot for giving us
Thank
your
you.
time. It was indeed a
No,
pleasure talking to you.
thank you. It was nice talking to you.